Okay, so I am going to start officially now, even though Alyson and I have been chatting a little bit before. I'm going to just morph magically into my Drew Barrymore-esque talk show host persona and say welcome to everyone for our first ever Soul Talks. This is a joint project brought to you by Daily Apple, which is me, and Soul Fuel Fitness, which is my friend and partner MJ. And we are both small businesses who have weathered the start of this pandemic, I think with grace and style, but we've had to pivot a bit. And lucky for me, one of the things I've always wanted to do in my career was be a talk show host. And with this new advent of Zoom, I now get to do it. But what we really wanted to do with these talks is break down barriers, have amazingly interesting, smart, breakthrough guests. And I couldn't be more excited to introduce you to my first ever guest, Dr. Alyson Kelvin, who has been not only a friend and a client of mine in years past in Toronto, but she is one of the leading virologists in Canada. I'm going to just read you her little bio so that you get a bit of information, then I'm going to turn it over and Alyson can say a few words. So Alyson is a scientist focusing on emerging viruses and the development of vaccines for these emerging viral threats. She wants you to know how emerging viruses cause disease in people in order to develop the best vaccines or therapeutics. She holds an assistant professorship at Dalhousie University and a visiting scientist position at, I hope I'm saying this right, is it Vito Intervac or Vido?
Yep, Vito.
Okay, awesome. In her career, she studied several emerging viruses, including SARS-CoV, pandemic 2009, H1N1, influenza viruses, avian influenza viruses. I feel very smart saying all these things. And now the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. She maintains international collaborations to facilitate the quick transfer of knowledge and regions around the world during urgent times. She's currently an advisor on the World Health Organization SARS-CoV-2 preclinical modeling group. This is just like, I'm getting sweaty just like with pride. And her models are being used to evaluate COVID-19 vaccine candidates in Canada. So welcome. I'm just going to call you Alyson. Do I have to call you doctor? Hi, Dr. Alyson. It's so good to have you. Your bio is amazing.
Oh, thank you. It's my work that I'm really passionate about and interested in doing. So it's been years and, you know, it didn't happen overnight. So to me, it's just the history of what I've done. It's not, you know, there's no badge of honor. It's, you know, I feel lucky to be doing this work.
Well, I beg to differ. I think it is a huge badge of honor. I am going to just tweet the you know what out of this once this is over. My bio says Leslie always dreamt of being an aerobics instructor ever since she was a little girl. Anyway, I am really excited about this because, as you know, we used to work out together. I was your teacher, and we had so much fun over the years. But always in your lovely, quiet, brilliant way. During cold and flu season at the back of our rambunctious fitness class, you would be quietly telling people, okay, guys, like the flu's coming around, time to get your shots, and you know, and it would always generate sometimes heated information and heated discussions. And I just loved, you've always been kind, compassionate, empathetic, but so knowledgeable on these things. So this is, and I'm a bit of a nerdy science person. I read all this stuff, and I slowly started to educate myself in viral avoidance. As you know, I'm a complete germphobe. I always have been, and damn, like people, what did you think was going to happen if you didn't wash your hands? So I'm glad we're at least up to speed on that on a mass scale. Just for our guests who are listening, thank you for muting and having your camera silent for now, because we are going to record this and let people do this on demand, because a lot of people want to hear what Alyson has to say. We are going to do something called the Fresh in 5 questions, and I'm going to ask Alyson some sort of lightning round questions about the virus and the pandemic and parenting through it all. And then in the last sort of 10 minutes, we're going to open it up to you guys. So our guests who are online and can hear me, I will be, you can unmute yourself. You can send a question through the chat. We will try to get through everything in the time that Alyson has. As you can see, she's got a little window back there, so I think she has to get back to her work shortly, but we've got at least a good half hour or so with Alyson. So you ready to go, Dr. Kelvin? I'm very excited. Okay, so I've created 5 questions for you. My first question is, could you explain in your always articulate and eloquent way exactly what the coronavirus is and what does the COVID-19 disease do to people's bodies? Like, what's the difference between coronavirus, COVID-19, and how do each affect in different ways, if at all?
All right, so I think it's a really good question, an important place to start. You know, what is this virus, or what is a virus? A virus is a submicroscopic, and I'm going to use the actual definition, and then we'll break it down. A submicroscopic intracellular parasite. And what that means is you can't see a virus with your naked eye, and you can't even see it with a regular microscope. You have to use an electron microscope because it's so small. There's a debate whether or not viruses are living because basically they're inactive when they're outside of your cells. So they need to get inside of your cells to actually reproduce, make more viruses, and be active itself. And in that process, it kind of takes over your cell and it uses your cell's machinery to do what it wants. And that's kind of how you get sick. It's because these little, you know, submicroscopic balls, they're usually spherical. They get into your cells, so they go through the barrier, your cell membrane, and then they get inside and they tell your cells what it wants to do. So with SARS-CoV-2, it's a coronavirus. Again, it's spherical and it has all these spikes coming out of the outside. And those are actually called the spike protein. And what those are responsible for doing is binding to the surface of your cells, kind of like a key into a door or a lock in a door, opening up the door, allowing the virus inside. So the spike binds to the outside of your cell, allows it to get in. And those spikes are actually why we call it a coronavirus, because it looks like a corona, you know, the corona of a sun, or a corona or a crown. So
not a beer, not the beer.
Yeah, not the beer. So it kind of, that's where the name comes from and why we call it a coronavirus. This is the 3rd coronavirus to spill over, SARS-CoV-2, spill over from an animal reservoir, most likely bats in this case, and cause disease, significant disease in humans in the last 20 years. So of course, the first being SARS-1. So that's kind of a background of this SARS-CoV-2. Where it targets in your body, we typically think of it as starting as a respiratory virus. So it infects the cells of your upper respiratory tract in your nose, but it also targets some of the cells that are in kind of the lower reaches of your lungs, kind of where your lungs start that balloony effect when you breathe, how it expands and contracts. It will infect some of those cells that line the wall of your lungs, which holds your airspace. And that's really important because as this virus infects those cells, it causes damage to those cells in your lungs, which can lead to a whole bunch of problems, including scarring or just destruction of what you need to breathe. So your lungs are, of course, super important to get oxygen into your body. And once those cells that line the walls of your lungs, which are important for gas exchange, if they're damaged, you're not going to breathe as easily.
And is that why, so if it invades a cell, is that why some people, like, we're trying to figure out why some people have a very mild response, some people, it's just the way your cells respond to the, I mean, the virus sounds like it's the boss. It comes in and just sort of takes over, and some people's bodies are like, screw you, I'm not letting you in, we're gonna try to push you out, and it's good. And some people, it's a different scenario. Is that sort of a good layperson's way of explaining why some people get it harder than others?
I think it's a good question and a good way of looking at that. I think each individual person or group of people that can be categorized together, such as, you know, children or older people or people with specific comorbidities or like pre-existing conditions, they will all have different reasons for having different responses. So we know that men are more susceptible to severe COVID-19 and hospitalization, whereas women seem to fare better in the long term. One of those reasons is because as women, we have a different antiviral response to men. So that seems could possibly be a reason why we're more protected. We might be able to clear the virus faster.
Okay, and that's a good lead into question number 2. But on a side note, before I go into question number 2, our next week's talk, which I can send you the tape on later, is on perimenopause. And I've been reading a fair bit about how, and it's certainly not a very, I don't think it's a very desirable topic for research, but that perimenopause can be affected, and that there are some women who are going through hormonal transitions and are severely affected by the change of menopause, that if infected with the coronavirus, it can cause other complications that they're not quite sure of yet. So it's a nasty thing. And you sort of picture it when you see the actual picture of the virus. There's quite beautiful. There's someone who's done like interpretive artwork with it, but evil at the center.
Yeah. Just to mention, after the respiratory tract, so the lungs, it's also clear that the virus is targeting other organ systems, which are playing into the disease, which is COVID-19. So that, you know, it's kind of starts as a respiratory tract infection, but then can lead to complications in the heart, your vascular network, and then also the virus can target your liver and your kidney. So, and that might all be specific to each person, or, you know, a certain type of person.
Right. And so in my question number 2, which is a good lead-in, what's the latest about kids and transmission? I mean, early days, it was like, oh, kids can't get it, don't worry about it. Oh, well, now they can get it. They get it, but they don't exhibit symptoms. Oh, now they're the fastest growing. So it changed. I mean, I know that it's emerging because new information is being discovered daily. What's sort of the latest on what happens with kids, especially as our next question is about school?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And to go back to the beginning of the pandemic, there was a couple of reports out of China that I took and wrote a perspective piece on. And what these reports showed is that, so what had happened is in China, you know, there was this lots of COVID-19 cases. So what some researchers went is they had these positive cases going into the hospitals, and they went back and started contact tracing into the families. And what they found is that actually the kids in the families were positive for the virus, but they weren't exhibiting disease. So right there, and this was several reports showing that children could be infected. So I took that. I wrote a perspective piece saying that we need to start looking at children better to understand if they are able to transmit the virus and what their actual clinical symptoms look like, because they didn't have a high proportion of cases being reported in China at the time. I think that this issue got politicized extremely because, without kids going to school, people can't work. And it's caused a lot of probably mental health stress in both parents and children. So I completely understand how this is an important issue. But the evidence was there right from the beginning that kids can be infected. We needed to do a bit more research to determine if they can spread the virus, but being a respiratory virus researcher, it was always highly unlikely to me that they would be able to be infected. They'd have virus in their respiratory tract, so we could see virus in their nose, but them not be able to transmit the virus would have been highly unusual. The data coming out now is that definitely children can be infected. They can have a range of disease symptoms just as adults, although they do seem to have a higher percentage of asymptomatic cases and a lower percentage of severe cases needing hospitalization or leading to poor outcome. But, again, they can transmit the virus, and that's an important finding. So we need to be putting in the right measures to stop transmission and stop our kids from being infected. That doesn't mean closing everything down. It's finding ways we can work with what the real data is showing.
That's such an important topic of discussion. I think that's also a big draw for a lot of people who want to listen to you speak. I mean, you're a parent, you have two beautiful girls. I'm sure you've got, scientist Alyson, who is looking at this virus and taking it apart and looking at the facts and giving perspective. But then there's mother Alyson, who's like, okay, I've got my kids in school, I've got my kids on a plane, I've got, all these things that are happening in your personal life that cause everyday worry like everybody else, no matter how much information you have. So my next question, it sort of leads right into it, is that, going back to school, well, I mean, pandemics aside, it's a very stressful time. I am like, I basically need to be tranquilized at the start of the school year. But it's amplified, I'm sure. And I mean, I'd love to hear, if you're comfortable talking about your personal feelings towards it, being a mom yourself. What are some of the myths, though, that are circulating in the media? I mean, I find the media blows stuff out of proportion. There's so much clickbait on there right now that will feature a child and it showcases that this child has died in hospital. And if you actually click on the article, it was from a story in October and completely unrelated, but you're reading the headline and thinking, oh my gosh, this 2-year-old has just died from the coronavirus. And it's not, it's just to get you into the site. So, how do we make sense of this? What as parents, and what are you as a parent, what should we be focusing on?
Yeah, I think those are all, again, good questions, and something that I've been thinking about a lot as a parent and being a researcher. That actually really motivates me, understanding how important family units are and how complicated the love for your child is, and the need to keep them safe, but also to let them grow as people. That motivates me in my work. And it's one of the reasons why I study viruses that affect children, and how that, how we can say with influenza, kids have a higher likelihood of developing severe complications, hospitalization. That is one of my motivations for wanting to develop a better vaccine for kids for influenza. With this, when when it first, SARS-CoV-2 first emerged and those reports were coming out, I didn't immediately take my kids out of school, but I was watching the cases, what's happening in Canada, what's happening in my local area. And that was really important. And that's actually my strongest message, I think, for everybody, is there is a lot of stuff going on, a lot of false news stories or politicized stories that come out, such as kids can't get infected, kids don't spread the virus, which is untrue, and it's a disservice to keeping our communities healthy and finding the right paths forward. So with this, when SARS-CoV-2 first emerged, a colleague of mine and we wrote a piece in The Conversation that said that, try to block this stuff out and concentrate on what the public health officials are saying. Look at the case numbers in your area, and this is a dynamic situation. It's rapidly evolving. We're learning about the virus. That's something that, I keep going back to. By the end of December last year, we had no idea what this virus was. This is a newly emerging virus. We're learning about it every day. So things are going to change. And the advice from your public health officials will change, but they're the ones, hopefully, and I have a lot of trust of the public health officials in Canada. They're giving you the information to keep everybody safe and try to keep our mental health, but also our economy going at the same time.
Yes.
So I think they're doing a really good job of balancing those three facets.
I agree. And I mean, even though Facebook, and I certainly won't slam in case we were ever going to get sponsorship or something fabulous like that, but there's a lot of not accurate information that goes out on Facebook and generates a lot of heated and, fearful conversations and dialogues on Facebook chats and groups that people then take as Bible truth. And that has been something, early days on, I was like, okay, you have to wipe down the groceries. Oh, no, you don't wipe down the groceries. And I don't know what to read, and there's too much. And I think focusing on that, like your trusted health officials, hopefully most of us, I can't think, in my opinion, if people are buying into conspiracy theories and things like that, this is my opinion, then, there's no hope for any of us. So we have to put our faith in the trusted public health officials, amazing people like you who are doing groundbreaking work to try to make this, it's never going to go away, but be manageable.
Yeah, exactly. That's my take-home message is, watch your local health unit, watch the case numbers in your area. That should help you decide, if you want to keep your kids in school. If the cases are going up, it's, and you have a kid with, an underlying health condition, you might want to rethink what your plans are. But, if the case numbers are low, then that's, something to take into consideration.
Well, and that's, a good lead into question 4, because unfortunately case numbers, I'm sure you follow Toronto, because even though you don't live here anymore, it's, as you said, it's near and dear to your heart. And the news here ain't good these days, and people are starting to panic again. I went to the grocery store 2 days ago, and once again, there was no toilet paper, there was no pasta, and there was no paper towel, and no cleaning supplies, including vinegar. So I was like, okay, we're back to, March, when we tried to get home we were racing to get to the border after visiting my parents in Florida and trying to, get there, and people are like, you need this, there's no toilet paper anywhere. And I was like, why is there no toilet paper? Back to my germ phobia. You know me, I wash my hands ridiculous amounts. I always have. I yell at people who don't. I have hand sanitizer everywhere, and I have for the last 25 years. But outside of physical distancing, which I hope is a phrase I never have to hear again in a year or so. Wearing a mask, which I will admit personally has been a really tough, I do it religiously, but it's been a tough adjustment. I always feel like I'm in the Handmaid's Tale. Practicing good hygiene, adhering to strict social circles based on what our government is telling us to do. Is there anything else we can do? I mean, I see, people like Gwyneth Paltrow are selling fabulous tinctures and things for $400 that prevent you from getting all these horrible viruses. I'm assuming they don't work, but any other tips that families and individuals can do to strengthen their bodies?
Yeah, so I think that all those tips that you just mentioned, that's really what's going to keep you safe. You can't rely on, vitamin C or, sleeping 8 hours a day. I think that will help.
What's that?
You
Who gets 8 hours of sleep? Whatever.
It might help certain people, but this virus is so unpredictable. I think that, the best thing is just not to get it. So all those preventative measures are what's going to keep yourself safe and your family safe. So I can't stress that enough.
Well, and it's the lead into our last question too, which is what you're most passionate about. I know it often can get very heated. I've certainly stayed out of any Facebook forum, even like well before COVID, but I've seen, people circulating petitions and all kinds of things. Vaccine hesitancy has been prevalent long before this. There were people, celebrities saying that vaccines caused autism and all sorts of things. And you and I have talked about this at length before. So what advice, and then we will open it up to the people online if they have questions. I see some coming through on the chat. What advice would you give parents as you are racing to develop the vaccine for Canada and evaluating all the information that's coming in? What advice would you give parents when they're processing all that information about vaccinations and about, like, we are about to go into cold and flu season? I am a religious flu shot vaccinator, as you know, I always have, but I know lots of people that don't. What's your advice to people who are feeling especially nervous this year?
Well, so right now, the lead vaccine candidates are in human clinical trials. Nothing has been approved in the US or in Canada. China and Russia have approved public use of certain vaccines, but this was really skipping phase 3 clinical trials. So there's typically three phases of human clinical trials that occur after months to years of preclinical testing of a vaccine. So right now, again, where the lead candidates are in human clinical trials, some are in phase 3. And if we just focus on the ones in phase 3, those are the ones that our government has mostly made agreements with these companies such as Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson &
Johnson. I saw that this morning in the news.
Yeah, so if we focus on those and look at, so this is all public information. You can go to the World Health Organization. They have a draft COVID-19 vaccine landscape. You can see where each vaccine candidate is in their preclinical and clinical testing. And you can read even the study designs and who's specifically which person, but how many people have been enrolled, when it started. And these phase 3 trials, most of them aren't projected to end until 2022. So I don't know if we are going to have a vaccine available for public use in Canada, in the next 6 months. So we're going to go through this cold and flu season most likely without a vaccine unless there's some emergency use approval for a vaccine. And knowing how Health Canada evaluates vaccines, they want to see that before the vaccine even goes into people for human clinical trials, that this vaccine is safe. That's number one, that it's not going to cause any type of toxicity. So there's a number of toxicity screens that are done with each vaccine. They want to see that it's effective. So this vaccine, you're not just giving yourself something that's safe, but it actually does what it says it's going to do. Because if you think you're getting a vaccine that protects you from COVID-19, but it hasn't been evaluated to either stop the disease or block the virus from from infecting you, this could be this could be very detrimental. You know, you think you got this vaccine, you think you can go out to parties again, but you're really not protected. So Health Canada makes sure that the evidence is there that this vaccine can either decrease disease or stop infection. And then finally, Health Canada makes sure that the vaccines can be scaled up in the most pure way, so that we call this under good manufacturing procedures, so GMP procedures. They want to see that the components of the vaccine are pure, that you're not going to have any contaminants in it.
Right.
So all of the vaccine manufacturers and developers right now need to satisfy these 3 things before even going into human clinical trials. And then at that point, Health Canada can make a decision: are we going to approve this vaccine for public use after the clinical trials have occurred?
So the likelihood of this actually, I mean, I sort of have focused on, like, fingers crossed, end of 2021 is when we're emerging. And so also following things like the Spanish flu and other pandemics like this, you look at sort of like an 18-month kind of thing from beginning till it starts to shift to end. That's been for me, and, you know, before I turn it over to other people to ask questions, that's been very helpful for me. Early days of the pandemic, I was watching, you know, oh, it's gonna just another 2 weeks, but just another 2 weeks, and then you would just get disappointed and more stressed. And now I just sort of go, okay, it's Wednesday, we're just going to get through Wednesday, and we're kind of setting our sights way ahead on, you know, we're just managing for now, and there will be a brighter future down the line.
Yeah, it's definitely a new normal, and people such as myself and colleagues here at VITO, and then my other colleagues at the Canadian Centre for Vaccinology, you know, that this is our most important study right now.
Yeah,
what
Olympics.
we want to get done, but we also want to do it as safely as possible, and as accurately as possible. So just to really answer your question, what you were asking, you know, people who have questions, I think, because especially there's so many vaccine candidates right now, which I think is great. We need as many options as possible for 2 reasons. One, we don't know what's going to work. We need to finish the testing. So we need to make sure that at the end of that, you know, maybe 18 months, we have something. And 2, if the more we have that are effective, the better, because we're talking about vaccinating, you know, billions of people worldwide. If we put all of our efforts into one vaccine, we're going to have a supply and demand issue. There's no way we'll have enough doses to cover, you know, even a province. So we need to have different types of vaccines that are using different materials, so that we can make as many human doses as possible. But with this, you know, there's a lot of questions. There's, you know, people, it's hard to understand why we need so many different types of vaccines. And I encourage everyone to talk to your doctor, you know, ask questions, but also be open to, you know, what's going on. This is obviously a very different situation. We're in the middle of the greatest pandemic of the past 100 years, and in a different world. So we are developing vaccines for this new world.
And bleach doesn't cut it, right? Like injecting yourself with the bleach.
No, please don't do that.
We'll just send that out to the, you know, to our friends in the U.S. and make sure that gets
Yeah, but
I'm going to, sorry, go ahead, Alyson.
it's really good, it's important to have questions and, to ask, people who are knowledgeable about the vaccines, I think, and get your information again from, the public health officials and your doctors. So, but don't be embarrassed to ask.
I like asking lots of questions, especially from smarty pants people like you. So we may have questions. If everybody's comfortable, I'm going to give you some time. I'm going to open up the speaker view. And if you do want to ask a question where Alyson can see your lovely face, you can take your camera off. You can unmute yourself. So I'm going to do that now. So if you're like, no, I don't want to be seen, you can keep your camera off. And I have 3 questions in the chat. So I'm just going to give you guys a second. I'm going to switch the speaker view to gallery. Oh, did that work? Oh, no, I don't think it's working. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Can you still hear me okay?
I can hear you.
All right. Show grid video. It's still just you and me. All right, that's fine. I'm going to, but people can unmute themselves, I think. And I'm going to go to the chat box here. So I've got one from, oh, Stephanie. You guys are doing amazing. Thanks, Steph. We love you. So it's a question from, it's Mackenzie L. I think it's Lori. Hi there. I need to travel to Australia around Christmas with my baby, who will be 8 months old. I'm concerned about the recycled air in the plane and what I can do to protect her. What are Alyson's thoughts around travel, whether it's relatively safe for a child this young, and would she have any suggestions for how to protect even better?
Yeah, that's a hard situation. I guess, again, I would go back to, I'd be watching the cases, what's going on, what are the guidelines from the airlines as you're flying, to make sure that they're actually taking the situation seriously. I flew back in March and I found just even getting from Halifax to Saskatchewan to be very stressful because there weren't any direct flights. I had to take three planes. I wore an N95 mask the whole time, which is, kind of that heavy duty mask that doesn't allow any air to go into the mask or escape from you. So I was traveling for about 12 hours and wore the mask the whole time, and I found it very fatiguing. And I wear N95s for my job. So, that was hard for me. So I can't imagine wearing one if you're not used to it. And just looking at how COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2 are affecting infants, it doesn't seem to typically lead to severe disease in that age group, but so I would feel a little comfort in that, but I would still have the concerns that you raised. I don't need, obviously it's hard to put a mask on a baby, and I'm not a doctor, but I wouldn't recommend it. So I don't have any other tips than that, I guess, watching what the case numbers are, deciding if you really have to travel, and the concerns of the recycled air are, valid as well. But I think some airlines are instituting certain types of filtering systems that you want to check what your airline is doing to keep the passengers safe. When I flew, there was, they kept each row, there was one person per row, so it kept us distant. And I felt that was that helped my anxiety levels. If I got sick traveling, then I wouldn't go into work. So I had, and then I was also worried about just being sick, but this was kind of a double whammy for me. So high anxiety for sure. And
it is. And and my best advice too is, and it's non-medical or probably not, but I've had Lysol wipes in my bag when I travel forever. And 2 years ago when we were on a plane, people like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I always wipe my feet down, because I think they do now, but before they didn't. And I was handing them out. I was the most popular person on the plane. And they were like, I never thought to wipe this down. I'm like, I've been training for this my whole life. Okay, I'm going to get to the next question, because we've got a couple more coming in, and I want to make sure I keep you on time so you can get back to your test tubes. Okay, what are your thoughts, Alyson, on herd immunity and those who just want to get it and feel that then they'll be immune?
Yeah, again, that's a good question. And I want to really stress that that term, herd immunity, is saved for those who've been vaccinated. This isn't a term that we use, and this is defined by the WHO. It isn't a term used for someone who's been infected or groups of people that have been infected. It's the number of people that have been vaccinated and are protected from an infection or a disease. So the question almost, that term can't be applied to that question. But if we think about, we usually think that once you've been infected with a virus or a certain pathogen, you will develop this long-term immunity because of your adaptive immune response. Right now, we don't know enough about how long-lived that immune response is. So when we consider being protected from a virus, usually we think of having an antibody response. And those are little proteins that are produced by immune cells called B cells. And what they can do is those proteins kind of encapsulate a virus and block the virus from infecting your cells. So if we think about those antibodies, we don't know how long-lived those antibodies are. Are we going to have antibodies toward the virus for 6 months? And that's kind of what's typically been shown for seasonal coronaviruses. So these are viruses related to SARS-CoV-2 that cause seasonal colds. We know the adaptive immune response to those is actually quite short, 6 months to a year, 2 years, maybe max. And we don't know if there's other immune responses that will be either shorter or longer lived. So you're almost gambling if you think you're going to go get infected and then be protected. Again, many unknowns. We don't know how long-lived the immune system will actually keep you protected, or if you have an individual pre-existing condition that might make your body less able to develop a protective long-lived response.
Okay, thank you. And that's that's something I didn't know, and I appreciate that about the herd immunity, because that is something that is talked about quite regularly. And so that's really interesting and that's information that needs to be circulated a bit more, because yeah, I'll tell you offline one time about how when Luke got chickenpox, even though he had the vaccine, we got vaccinated, but he still got it. And someone outed me. We had to stay home from school. He was fine, but we had to stay home from school. And people were like, somebody outed me on Facebook, and people wanted to come to my house so that they could infect their child with chickenpox. And I was like, first of all, anyway, don't even get me started about being outed about chickenpox on Facebook. All right, last question. I have one more, and then that'll keep us probably right on time. Does Dr. Kelvin have any advice for families with infants, specifically how to keep them safe? I have some clients and friends who are pregnant or have delivered, one who delivered like early days pandemic, and I could barely breathe for them, knowing the panic of that. So that's a great question to end on. What can people do with babies?
Yeah, so I really feel for those people. Just to give you a little insight, that I was working on influenza, and actually pandemic influenza, in the spring of 2009, and I was writing a paper on pandemic influenza and predicting the next virus that would cause the next pandemic. And I took a break, and I got online, and there was this news article about this mysterious respiratory virus that turned out to be the 2009 pandemic virus. And I was 4 months pregnant at the time. And everybody was predicting the second wave. And we were highly anticipating the vaccine, and everything was supposed to happen in October. And I was giving birth in October.
Is this H1N1?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember. I had it. It was bad.
So this was one of the most stressful times, knowing, like, being a pandemic influenza researcher, knowing that pregnant women and infants were high risk groups for developing severe disease from this virus, hospitalization and death. And delivering in the middle of the second wave before the vaccine was available, my anxiety was like this. So I feel for all the mothers. What I can say is that this COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2 aren't pandemic influenza. Pregnant women and infants don't seem to be in high risk groups. That doesn't mean try to go out and get the virus.
Don't go to a frat party tonight.
Yeah, but at least you're not in a high risk group. You should be thinking about your husbands, because men are more susceptible to hospitalization and death than women. Do your best to, keep all, those hygiene tips and limit your interactions with people. I think that, those same things apply here.
That's great advice. So yes, hand washing. We'll get my husband Chris to get back into his cop outfit and as officer scrubs, and we'll teach everybody in our next session about proper hand washing. Although I think everybody's an expert now. Stay out of the clubs, stay out of the bars. Anyway, a little bit of humor sometimes helps just to decrease the stress level. But yeah, I do remember that pandemic H1N1, and it was hard. So my heart goes out to all of the moms or moms to be or new moms, seasoned moms, everybody. It's a hard time, but I have to say, Alyson, I feel much calmer knowing that you are at the helm, driving at least one of these ships to hopefully get us out of this crisis. And I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy day to talk to me. I feel honored. You are like, well, I've said it to you before, you're like Wonder Woman to me. I think you're amazing. And you do it with such grace and style and compassion and empathy. So thank you so much for being my first guest.
Oh, thanks for having me, Leslie, and everyone for listening to me. And I think the same of you, Leslie, and how you keep the community together. And if anybody has any questions, they're, welcome to tweet me at my Twitter account or my lab Instagram. I'd be happy to, help out any way I can.
So you can get that. I tagged you on a lot of different posts, so you can grab that from Daily Apple social media feed. Anybody who wants to talk to Alyson directly, or Soul Fuel feed. And I would say probably by the end of the month, we'll be on Oprah. So I'll let you know when she calls, and we'll get ready for that conversation.
Okay.
Thanks, Alyson. I'm going to start. Bye. I'm going to do a take and scene.